Major shout out to Synth Palace for renting out this TR-808. They're based in Toronto and they have a huge array of gear. And they rent out the classic vintage drum machines and synths, like the TR-808. So if you're in Canada or just the general region and looking to rent out some gear, I highly suggest to check out Synth Palace. I've left a link to their website in the description. I've had it for about a week now and I already wish that I owned it, but you know, the price. While this video is sponsored, it is not in any way sponsored by Roland. They've had zero influence on what I've decided to focus on in this video and the comparisons that I'm making. I have a deep love for electronic music and rhythms, and I wanted to document the difference between the world's most iconic and expensive drum machine and one of Roland's currently issued and least expensive drum machines, the TR-6S. While I do not have the TR-8S, there will be mentions of that throughout the video as well because it kind of goes with the comparison because it's just a little bit closer to what the TR-808 is, but I don't have it. I just have the 6S. I wish I had it. Today's video is, however, sponsored by DistroKid. I'll be revealing my DistroKid streaming stats and revenue later in this video, showing you where the majority of my streaming revenue is actually coming from. I promise that you're going to be surprised. Spoiler alert, it's not Spotify. So this is like a sonic blindfold test between these two that you guys will be taking, as well as some what I think is fascinating knowledge about the TR-808. There's just a whole history to this instrument. The 808 is like a whole culture within itself, and yeah, why so expensive? It could have something to do with the hype and just the incredibly long list of iconic artists who have used the 808 in their own music.
That could be it.
I'm aware that to most this video is sort of like a hypothetical situation. Obviously, there is most likely a very small percentage of people who are even considering buying the 808 at its current price. It's just good to know where we're at in terms of emulating this classic analog sound. So, here's what to expect in this video. We'll be talking about and comparing prices. I find that the history of the price of the 808 is also quite fascinating. Why is it so expensive? Design and basic instrument workflow comparison. Analog versus this new technology called ACB, analog circuitry behavior. This is the technology that many new drum machines use to imitate that classic analog sound. And I think that you'll see with the blindfold test that it's really hard to tell the difference. So that is what this video is about. If you're looking for something specific, check out the chapters linked in the description. It's all nice and organized for you. All right, let's get ready. The TR-6S is $410, the TR-8S is $800, and the TR-808 started off at $1,200 back in 1980. So that starting price by today's standards would actually be a lot more than $1,200 because, you know, inflation. And by the way, this is just what Wikipedia says. I'm not sure how accurate that actually is, although Wikipedia is pretty accurate. But now, today, it's a different story. It's currently hovering at around $5,500 to maybe $6,000. It cost me half the price of the TR-6S to rent the 808 for a week. I don't have exact metrics on this, but the price has gone from about $2,000 to around $5,500 or $6,000 within the past few years. And by the looks of it, that price hike is not slowing down anytime soon. Here's a graph from Reverb showing you the price hike just in the past year. This just seems to be the trend for most vintage gear. It's all just skyrocketing. Naturally, this is just what happens when gear is no longer issued, and there's a lot of controversy over this topic as well. Analog people, we'll call them, are frustrated and think that Roland should reissue an exact replica of the classics to drive that price back down because it has gotten a little bit ridiculous. But Roland seems to be focused rather on this new age of technology called ACB, analog circuitry behavior, rather than replicating what they've already made in the past.
So why is it so expensive?
It's vintage from the early 80s, certainly because it's analog, and while we've gotten really close to imitating it, there's always going to be that little percentage of difference. It's obviously not possible to replicate exactly, especially seeing as every 808 sounds different. It's also just the experience of the instrument. It does one thing, it's super straightforward, and you're making beats on it knowing that countless iconic artists made beats the exact same way with the same machine. It's just the hype, but does it improve the end product of your music in 2021? Debatable. Let's talk about design and instrument workflow. This topic sort of speaks for itself. The 808 is built like a brick. It takes up a lot of desk space. I mean, check out the size difference. So the 808 is literally a tank, the TR-6S is the complete opposite in terms of size, and the TR-8S is kind of in between the two. Smaller in size means less space for instruments though, so there's 6 on the TR-6S and 11 on the 808. So compared to the 6S in this department, the 8S would be a better choice because it also has 11 channels like the 808. The 6S is also battery powered, so you could take it with you anywhere you want. It's actually a delight to travel with. Working with the 808 is an experience, it's just awesome. Compared to the 6S and 8S, it's just a much simpler instrument to work with. Everything is just right there in front of you. There's no screen or any sort of menu diving. It took me one YouTube video and less than an hour to figure out the 808, so time is less of an investment, as opposed to learning about Roland's modern drum machines, which requires a lot more manual reading and YouTube videos. You've got level or volume, tone, decay, as well as a few different instrument options for each slot. The 6S and other current Roland drum machines are heavy with menu diving. I find myself scrolling through sounds a lot, sort of just comes with the territory. And don't get me wrong, if you want to create a quick drum beat, it's just as immediate as the 808. But because I have so many more options to craft my sounds internally, I find myself doing that. There's way more space for pattern variations. Keep in mind that this video is focused on the 808, but all of the other classic TR drum sounds are in the 6S as well as the 8S. And you could just switch your kit out on the fly. And all of the classic drum sounds use analog circuitry behavior. I know I keep mentioning that term, we're gonna get to it in a bit. I could program sounds that are outside of the drum machine world, like melodic sounds. There is a master effects option as well. So you're stepping into the world of sampling and instrument orchestration rather than just being a hardcore drum machine. And that is something that's true of the new age of Roland TR drum machines. This particular 808 unit is modded. I can tempo sync through MIDI with the TR-6S. Original 808s are MIDI-less, in which case finding a specific tempo is just such a nuisance. There's no like specific digits here, and it's pretty much impossible to tempo match anything, it's pretty frustrating. I actually threw together a few samples on the TR-6S. There's been a lot of comparisons, so why not team these two together?
As best friends.
Another frustrating thing about the TR-808 is that there is no shuffle. I honestly could not believe that when I received this rental, but yeah, it's a thing. It wasn't until the 909 when shuffle became more of a classic sound. What about audio exporting options? Something else that's pretty important. With the 808, it's all analog, and so there's individual outs for each drum. So if you want to add external hardware effects to any of these drums, that's a possibility, which is always nice. Especially when you have effects pedals like the microcosm. But on the other hand, it's a lot of work, cable management, and money. You need a really nice audio interface just to pull this off, not to mention a bunch of extra external gear to use. So it gets pretty expensive and space consuming quick. With the modern TRs, you have the convenient, very convenient option of exporting through USB, which means that you don't need anything to export into your DAW onto individual stems. So obviously a night and day comparison there. I mean, if you're bouncing into a DAW, you're going to be processing in the box anyways at that point, right? It's just way more convenient and affordable to use plugins like the rest of us. So right before we do the blindfold test, let's talk about ACB, analog circuitry behavior. I want to point out that this is pretty important because it seems to be the future of Roland TR drum sounds. The TR-6S as well as the TR-8S both use ACB. So you're not just working with samples, you're working with an algorithm that responds similarly to the way analog does. It's more of a holistic approach. For example, you have your snappy knob right here for your snare drum. You've got your tuning knob right here for kick, let's say. Same with the toms, you're able to change the color of them. So obviously that's on an individual level. The beauty of the 808 is that each unit behaves differently. It's imperfect. So if you play any pattern, for example, the intonation of the notes depend on the pattern itself. They move around depending on what rhythms and drums are being played. And the TR-6S, I'll have to admit, is not quite as perfectly imperfect as the 808 is, but it gets pretty close. It behaves in this same sort of imperfect fashion. I read a few articles about ACB and find that it's really interesting. Drop a comment if you want me to dig a bit deeper into that, or if you know anything about it yourself. And now for the moment that I'm sure a lot of you have been waiting for. Let's get on with this blindfold test. We'll be starting off with one of my own grooves, followed by a classic groove. Also, it's important to mention here that it's pretty much impossible to get these to sound the exact same. I've done some pretty precise tweaking, but it's just not possible. In fact, if you compare two TR-808s, they're also guaranteed to sound different. We're just basically seeing if that analog character stands out to you and sounds better to your ears, or if you could even tell the difference. So keep that in mind when you're listening to these grooves. Alright, so can you pick up on that analog character? Let us know in the comments. Let's do this one more time. This time I'm going to play different grooves on each instrument. And you guess which one is the TR-6S versus the TR-808. Two different grooves, two different machines. Let's go. Okay, so be honest, could you tell which one was which? If you could tell the difference, do you think that one was better than the other? If you were able to consistently pick out the TR-808 and thought that it was better, do you think it's worth $5,500 to $6,000 better? All right, let's take a look at my streaming stats. Spotify is way ahead of most other platforms. No surprises there. The great thing about DistroKid is that they keep track of all these new platforms, as you can see here. My music is on probably close to 200 platforms, many of which I didn't even know existed, like KKBox, for example, which has earned me almost twice as much revenue as Spotify, I thought that was really surprising. I'm considered a microscopic streaming artist, and I'm still making quite a bit of profit off of my streams. Another important thing to mention is that all of this money is mine. DistroKid collects 100% of these royalties and brings them to me. The starting rate is $20 a year to release unlimited music to all major streaming platforms, as well as many other smaller platforms as well. And if you're interested, there is a 7% discount link in the description of this video. If you're hungry for a drum machine, and chances are that you are if you're watching this video, I've left an affiliate link for the TR-6S as well as the TR-8S in the description. You don't pay any extra if you end up using that link to purchase, and it's just one of the best ways to support this channel. Along with commenting, liking, and subscribing, of course, which I hope you do. Thanks for watching, guys, and hope to see you in the next video. Peace out.